The next speaker in our today's first keynote, Adrian Hon, is someone I've been super excited to get to Melbourne. I've been trying to get the right time and space to invite Adrian here. He's a game designer, author, former neuroscientist, CEO of and founder of Six to Start, who made some amazing stuff. He's going to talk about immersion, and he's got a new book in progress. I've spent the last few days with him, and he's been touring the world trying to make sense of why we're all, or our sectors and other sectors have been interested in this word immersive. And I think he's got some provocative things to say. At least it'll be a lot of fun too, so thanks heaps.
Thank you for that introduction, Seb. I'm here to talk about immersion, and specifically why do we use this word so much now? It's not a new word. We've used it for being immersed in water and other things, but now we use it for immersive experiences. We use it for immersive cocktail bars, restaurants. Even tourism is immersive now. What's not immersive? And so what I got interested in is thinking about what is it that people are really expecting when they go to immersive experiences, things described as immersive, and what are they really getting? And I'll just go and say what my definition of immersive is. And everyone has a different definition. Academics don't like the word immersive, I should say, because they're just like, it's too woolly. What do you mean? But the way I use it, which is not the same as what everyone else uses, is imaginative transportation to another universe. And so that's very broad. I mean, that could be like anything. It could be books. It could be video games. But I think that what I'm most interested in is embodied experiences. So ones you might use in a museum or ones you might use in immersive theater. Those are the ones that are slightly kind of interesting that we call those things immersive, because isn't just like existence immersive anyway, but we'll get into that. So I want to start with a few examples of what immersion has been applied to lately in the last 10, 20 years. Kind of look at the recent history and the older history of what immersion counts as, and then talk about 3 theories as to why immersive experiences and why immersion has become so popular right now. And so this is not an exhaustive survey of everything that is immersive now. You can invite me back for that talk. But it does touch on various different sort of ideas of what immersion is. And just first, I'll just start with like some of the stuff that I've worked on recently. As Seb mentioned, I worked at a company called Six to Start, which I founded, and probably best known for a game called Zombies Run, which I guess you would call like an audio immersive experience. Basically, you put your headphones in and you physically go for a run in the real world using your legs. A lot of people, when they hear Zombies Run, they're like, oh, so it's like Temple Run, you sit on your sofa and you play the game. No, you have to like physically move. And we turn your exercise into a kind of post-apocalyptic audio experience where you have to run to survive and to collect supplies and so on. And so it's had like 10 million players and been really kind of inspiring seeing how people have used it. We did a project with Marvel called Marvel Move that launched a couple of years ago. Before that, I got into games through alternate reality games. And so these are games that mix the real world and online. And so the first alternate reality game is really probably like 25 years ago, maybe. And these are games where you might see a clue in a newspaper leading you to a website, and you go to the website, and the website's got a phone number on it, and you call up the phone number, and that's a message. The message tells you to go to a location, you meet an actor there. And so there's this sort of like interplay between the real world, and which is like very normal now, but back then it was kind of exciting. And so we made a game called Perfect City. There were helicopters in there, lots of actors. There's a documentary about one of the puzzles we made, which took 14 years to solve. It was narrated by William Dafoe. It's nice. And I wrote a book critiquing gamification. This is like the cover of the Italian version because I think it looks better than the boring English one. It's called You've Been Played. And it is basically saying that gamification. Some gamification is good, but a lot of it is quite manipulative. And now I'm working on untitled immersive book. And so when we think about immersion, I think a lot of people connect it to technology, to visual, high-tech, illusionistic technology. So if you go to the Apple Vision Pro website or things like that, just the word immersion is everywhere. Like they call their kind of 360-degree, videos and environments, immersive environments. When you work in a, virtual reality environment in Vision Pro, it's like immersive mode. Meta Quest obviously is like really into the idea of immersion, augmented reality, mixed reality. Every time they talk about this stuff, it's immersive. And so it's very easy to think that immersion is technology. And actually, a lot of scholars basically accept this framing. And if you look at something like the Sphere, which obviously Kerry worked on, this is a kind of keystone. It's maybe one of the most impressive pieces of visual illusion ever made. And this is obviously using incredible technology. It's very immersive. That's literally immersive. And so if you look at the use of the term immersive over the last 200 years, it's nothing, nothing, nothing. And then 1990, it just starts rising. And so that's why a lot of people say immersion is kind of invented in 1990 in its modern sense. And that's when virtual reality started taking off, and cyberspace and the internet. People really started thinking about these things. Of course, there was virtual reality before 1990, but that's really when it kind of entered popular culture. And so it is true that a lot of immersive experiences, self-titled immersive experiences, use technology. I was in Korea recently, and a lot of the museums there have they call it immersive digital spaces, and these are spaces where they've got projectors on all the walls and the ceilings, and this is one. I don't even this is meant to be educational, but it's just some sci-fi thing, I guess. About the history of Korea, but clearly kids don't understand that, so why don't we just go and show them a movie? So a lot of immersive experiences are using technology. Here's another popular one that I went to recently called Bridge Command in London. This is basically like Star Trek, the simulator, like a super escape room. And so you've got multiple rooms covered in screens, and you're basically playing a video game. You're inside a video game, right? And you are embedded in technology. That's how the game takes place, the experience takes place. Then you have things that are kind of melding installation art and technology, projection art. So this is Meow Wolf's Omega Mart in Las Vegas, and this is something where you can go through a space. You feel like you're transported to this different space, and the technology is kind of adding to the immersion, to the idea that you're somewhere kind of unreal. And it's not just the projections. You can go into these different rooms, and there are radios you can play with. There's telephones. There's computers with desktops, and you can go and look at these videos. It's very highly interactive. But obviously, we have immersive experiences that people call immersive, and they accept are immersive, and don't really have technology at the foreground. Right, so this is the Bridgerton experience, very popular. You go there, you dress up in a gown or a suit, whatever, and then you are, in the Queen's ball, and you can go and dance and get your selfie taken with the Queen and all of that sort of thing. And there's not really like much technology in this, right? It's not about the technology. It's just about being somewhere else. This is like so popular now that Netflix is like buying up all these disused malls across America to create Netflix houses, and so you can go to the Squid Game experience and the Bridgerton experience and that sort of thing. And now, like, we are kind of retroactively applying the term immersive to stuff that kind of really existed long before 1990, like installation art. You know, if you go to the Serpentine Gallery now, or to any kind of modern gallery, you've got installation art, and the marketing, at least, will describe it as immersive, and maybe the audiences will. but like it's not really like any technology being used here in the sort of digital technology sense, although technology was used to make it. And then we've got things like immersive theatre. So this is Punch Drunk's immersive theatre, what we would call promenade theatre, where you put a mask on and you're walking through like a really massive environment, a 6-story environment that's been decorated to look like turn of the century mansion, and you've got actors all around you, and people find that very immersive, even though you're not allowed to use your phone here. You're not really using technology. And so as you start going back, you start finding art and experiences that if you brought them today, like everyone would call these things immersive, right? And some of them use technology and some of them don't use technology. So the ancestor of immersive Van Gogh probably is something like the Cathedral of Images in south of France. And this is a kind of projection mapping experience, which is kind of like more interesting actually than immersive Van Gogh, and it was being done 30, 25 years earlier. You go back even further than that, at the Paris Expo, 1900, you've got things like the Mariorama. What's going on here? You've got this sort of like almost life-size ship. People go onto the ship. Ship's on hydraulics, so it's kind of rocking back and forth. They're not using like cinema here. They did have cinema, obviously, back in 1900, but instead they're using 2 massive painted panoramas like scrolling on either side of the boat. So when you're on there, you kind of feel like you're going on this boat trip, and it's got smells, it's got sounds, it's got lighting. It's like a theme park. It's certainly if you went on it now, you call it like an immersive experience. But then you've got like things like the Eglinton tournament back in 1839, where just a bunch of like rich people in England and the UK decided to go and dress up and like cosplay as or LARP as knights, and they're inspired by Walter Scott and they're inspired by King Arthur. And I always have to kind of remind people, like young people, it's like we didn't actually have knights anymore in the 1800s. Like people were not wearing this stuff. They were not like fighting in tournaments. They were just doing like a reenactment here. And, of course, when you go to like a reenactments now, people will call that sort of thing immersive. We've got panoramas 100 years before, 30 years before that, where, you go into a massive kind of dome or massive sort of round building, and you've got paintings all over. And these were like so realistic. People felt so like immersed, and sometimes they would use that word that they would like throw up. Like Queen Charlotte, she went into one of these and apparently was like feeling very sick, because it felt like she was actually in sea. And so this is like, it's not moving, but it is like the ancestor of things like the sphere. And then you can keep going back as far as you want, and I'm not going to do that because it would take too long. But like here's one that I went to recently in Mantova in Italy. It's kind of like amazing, like sort of environment that's painted all over with like curved walls, so it's kind of hard to see like the edges of it. And when you're sitting in there, you kind of feel just completely like transported to this very bizarre space. Back when it was built, actually had curving cobblestone floor that blended into the walls. So it was kind of a complete environment, basically. So we have all these things, and some of them use technology and some of them don't use technology. And the reason why people go to them can't just be that it's technology. The reason why people go to the Willy Wonka immersive experience, the most famous thing that Scotland has done recently, is like not technology, right? It's because they want to go somewhere different and they're kind of excited to do something, or maybe something else, And so that's kind of what I want to look at is what is going on here, what really happened here, because we can't just say it's like VR, we can't just say it's these different things, because like most of these things are not virtual reality. So I have like 3 theories. And these 3 ideas, I mean, there's more theories in this, but these 3 ideas keep coming up in discussions that I have with creators and audiences of immersive experiences and fans. And I kind of want to explore these theories with you. The spoiler, there's kind of no definitive conclusions here, because it's such a young field. This is like the first time I've given this talk, so it's a fresh baking talk. But hopefully points the way to kind of useful research. So the first one is social connection. And so the idea here is like many immersive experiences are social experiences. Like when you go to an escape room, which is maybe one of the most popular form, certainly the most commercially popular form or successful forms of immersive experience, you are going there, you have to do it with like multiple people, you have to talk to them, right? You have to go and cooperate with them. And maybe, if you're like a family or something like that, or you want to meet up with your friends, you're like, I want to like see my friends and I want to do something that's social. And so this is a kind of very popular thing across different kinds of immersive experiences. In China, we had this thing called murder mystery games or Jubenxia, which was just phenomenally popular. Still hasn't really made it like outside of China. But this is where a group of people come together and they're trying to like solve a murder. But it's got more role play, a lot more role play than in escape rooms. I'll come back to this. And of course, we've got things like live action role playing, which is very old. And people are very interested in the kind of social aspect of pretending to be different people and interacting with people in different circumstances. And so actually, the theory behind this goes that in like the last 20 years, we're seeing rising rates of people saying they feel lonely, right? Because of screens. Like we're all on the internet now, we're all sort of like separated, and bowling alone, all these different ideas of people that are not connecting together anymore. And so people go to immersive experiences because they want to go and connect in an embodied way, not through the internet, to other people. That's like the theory. And so the immersive experiences, are able to tap into this market, basically, of lonely people. And I think that's kind of like it's a tricky argument to make because we don't really know, like, there hasn't been a lot of research on who is actually going to these things, right? Is it the case that people who were not doing things before socially are now going to escape rooms with like strangers? Or is it that people who were really social before and they used to go to pubs and bars and do sports are now simply shifting their like sites of sociability to something different? Like we don't really know that. So more research is required there. But this sort of like idea becomes a lot more convincing when you consider the structure of the encounter, right? All social encounters are obviously structured. You go to a bar, there's a certain way in which conversation unfolds. You go and take turns, buying rounds, that sort of thing. But I think what is different with immersive experiences, when people use that term, is that a lot of them are more explicitly structured, right? You're buying an experience. Often the structure, the flow of the experience is described online beforehand. You can read reviews. A lot of them are designed explicitly like video games with clear objectives, clear strategies, clear choices, clear ways to kind of succeed and fail and markers of progression. And so you kind of see that obviously in escape rooms where it's like, okay, you are like interacting with other people, but you know like what the purpose of the interaction is for, right? It's very clear what you're meant to be doing there. It's a bit more predictable, even if you have to sort of solve the puzzles. And one theory is that given that young people in particular now spend so much more time playing video games, perhaps having this kind of same structure ported over to real-world experiences gives people a bit of reassurance as to like, well, here's how I'm meant to interact with the people in this space, that I can be a bit more sure of what I'm meant to do. And so it becomes a bit more familiar if your experiences with video games. I don't think there's like anything inherently wrong with immersive experiences being highly structured. But there's kind of two things that we need to be aware of if we think that that is a good way to address issues of like people wanting sociality. And the first one is like, what is the structure, right? Some of these experiences, when they're structured, are designed for competition, right? They're designed for people to go and beat each other. They're designed, if not like deliberately, to sort of create anxiety. But we also have immersive experiences that really help people develop pro-social skills and things like that. And so that's the same with video games. The other angle, the other like issue that we need to think about in terms of sociality with immersive experiences is like the accessibility. Like these are not cheap things to do, right? If you go to an escape room, it's like in the UK it's £40, here it's probably like 60, 70, $80. Like we can't really expect people to go and do this very regularly if it costs that much. It's a pretty high price to pay if that's just what you want to go and do, to go and meet other people. And so we kind of need to figure out other ways of making them cheaper if this is going to be a way for people to go and get their dose, of like interpersonal interaction, whether that's like making these things more non-profit or volunteer run or getting state sponsorship, if that's important. So the second theory, these are like going up in like ascending order of interest, basically, is screen-free experiences. So this theory is that everyone's like sick of looking at their screens all the time, and they want to do something with other people, or maybe just themselves, that is not looking at a screen, right? So they want to do something in an embodied way. And so actually it's kind of interesting when Kerry mentioned the exhibition, down here. You're not like playing with like digital interactives. You are creating, well, I'm not going to say, but you're creating a cool thing in the exhibition, and that's like an immersive experience. That's a theory. And like that's kind of like unquestionable that is the case in something like a Bridgerton, experience. Like people are probably not like on their phones like that much, in the Bridgerton experience, except for like selfies, which I'll get onto in a second, right? This is like not a digitally mediated experience. And a lot of like real world social spaces are now banning phones, right? We have clubs and bars in the UK which are now just banning phones entirely because they want like a more, authentic, more like unmediated experience where people are not distracted by notifications or by just needing to kind of share what they do all the time. And so this is like a pretty sort of, it's not a bad idea, it's not a bad theory. I went to this experience called Phantom Peak in London. It's kind of like a little bit hard to describe. It's like a cross between like a scavenger hunt and an escape room. And what they've done is they've taken over this big warehouse and the area beside the warehouse in London, and turned it into this weird steampunk Wild West thing. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And like, you look at this and there's no screens. We're all just like dressing up or not, and we're all kind of interacting in character. And this is like a lovely, like authentic, non-digital experience. And then, you do something, and it's like actually no, there's screens everywhere. There's screens everywhere in this experience, right? In fact, the only real way you can like progress in the experience of Phantom Peak is by looking at screens a lot. You've got to use your phone to go and make progress in the story and find out what your objectives are next. And you've got to go and use screens all the time to go and collect clues. And so this is definitely not screen-free, right? In fact, you're probably spending more time looking at screens here, way more time looking at screens here than if you were like at a restaurant or in a bar. Harry Potter, like famously, a movie series that does not have a lot of screens in it. You're in a magic school. This is the Harry Potter exhibition in New York. And you think, oh yeah, like you'll go and like learn about, I don't know, potions or something. And the way in which you learn about potions is by, through a touch screen, right? You are obviously using just like a lot of screens in these experiences. So like, well, I don't know whether people are disappointed by this or not, but this is something, the way in which it works. And then you've got the infamous Star Wars hotel, the Galactic Star Cruiser. Just like everything is a screen. Every surface is a screen. The obviously we're on the space here. That's just like a massive cyclorama, with like a cool like high resolution projection of space there. You've got all these screens which are kind of interactive. In your hotel room, you've got a screen there which is a porthole. You've got a screen where you can go and talk to robots. The only way in which you can really sort of progress in the story, in the adventure of this like experience, this 3-day, $6,000 experience, is by looking at your phone a lot. Just a lot of screens. So when people go and say they don't want screens, I'm kind of a little bit like, like I'm tired of looking at bad screen, so I can't wait to get to like immersive experience to look at good screen. And so the screen thing is like not entirely convincing, like as a theory, because immersive experiences are also like a very important space for like self-expression. This is me in Seoul, just at one of like 5 million immersive experiences there. And of course, they need to go and make space for people to go and take selfies. Like all the museums have got selfie spots now, right? And this is like crucial for marketing. And so there's not really kind of any escape from screens in a supposedly screen-free experience. And so like really, of course, like screens are not actually the issue, are they? It's too blunt a description for what people are looking to avoid. Right? What people are looking to avoid in immersive experiences is not so much a screen, it's like the intrusion of the outside world. Right? They want to do something where for like a blissful like hour or 2 hours, they're not getting texts from the babysitter, they're not getting texts about work, they're just really immersed, absorbed in some experience, right? They're looking for like flow, total absorption in activity. And screens are actually a decent way, or they are a way of providing that kind of flow, because if you're doing digitally mediated experiences, you can change the difficulty, you can give people instructions if they get stuck in an experience. So when you're playing Bridge Command, it's like if you kind of get stuck, then it will like help you out. So people are kind of looking for flow. They're just looking for something where they're just completely engaged in an experience. But like we already have like flow experiences, right? If people want that, right, you can just go climbing. You can do chess. You can do knitting. You can really get absorbed in things that are not conventional immersive experiences. Although, if you wanted, you could call climbing an immersive experience. It's kind of weird. If you went and did climbing in virtual reality, you call that an immersive experience. But if you did climb in the real world, is that an immersive experience? Sensory immersion, right? So maybe the popularity of immersive experiences is really just like a product of people's desire for new flow experiences, like spectacular embodied flow experiences, right? So it's not really like anything to do with screens or not. You could put someone in like just 1 million screens and they would like it. You could put someone up in a place with no screens, just as long as they felt like they were being lost in the story, lost in the world. So the third idea is about agency. And this is kind of like the most interesting idea, which is maybe like a bit more directly related, I guess, to digital technology, right? Because digital technology allows you to go and automate like choices and interaction in a way that sort of was like less possible in the past. You just like automated it by like hiring humans to go and do things for you. And so the theory behind agency is that immersive experiences give you like choices and control and agency that we are lacking in modern life. Like people feel like they're trapped. I don't get to choose what to do, but if I go to an immersive experience, then I have more choice. And so that can be like going through a projection art exhibition and being able to take your own path through it, decide what to look at. It could be going to something like Phantom Peak and deciding how you're going to approach an encounter with someone there. Or it can even be as simple as something like an immersive theater show where you are deciding, you've got agency on which rooms to go in and which characters to follow. And so a lot of these things, like immersive theater and projection are often like explicitly sold on the idea of giving audiences more freedom and choice and interactivity compared to like traditional passive media. If you go and look at what a lot of people in immersive theater say, they make an explicit contrast between sitting like in a theater, where you don't get to do anything, you're just facing forward, and there's a proscenium arch separating you from the action, and that's like boring, that's passive, you've got no agency, versus immersive or interactive theater where you get to go and do something. So that's the theory of like what immersive experiences give you. They give you agency. And so that's kind of like it's a sort of tricky argument again, because I think the question you sort of have to ask is, like, are we actually lacking agency now? Like, certainly compared to the past, right? It's very easy to argue today that people have more choice and more agency in terms of what they eat and what they wear and where they travel and what they work on and what they study, you know, and who they marry, than they did 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, right? If you went back to, you know, the 1800s, people would be amazed, you know, at the average amount of agency that a normal person has and an average person has compared to now. So why is it that people kind of feel trapped? Why is it that people feel like they don't really have agency? You know, during the medieval period, the idea that you would have a lot of control over like where you lived or where you worked would just seem like absolutely bonkers. You know, like how could you even have that? That's just for like, you know, kings. But just because people have more choices now in their lives than in the past doesn't mean that people really have to be happy about them, right? So the better comparison can't really be historical. It's got to be within our existing society, within modernity. And, you know, when you open up Instagram, when you open up TikTok, you know, when you just watch TV or go to the movies, you are confronted with images of people who are like more interesting than you, right? You know, people who are traveling to different places, who are becoming different people, right? You know, who are transforming themselves into trad wives or, you know, into influencers or into like models or all these different things. They're like having all these experiences. And you're like, I would like to do that, you know, like I would like to go and transform myself in the way that I'm seeing them do it in social media. And so even though we have more choice now, it's still like not enough, right? That's kind of what the sort of message that we're getting. And certainly like even before social media, that's kind of what neoliberalism is like telling us. It's telling us you can never have enough, you can never be enough. You have to like be more in order to succeed and to be happy. And so maybe immersive experiences sell us a way to feel happy for a moment, to feel like we are getting the kind of agency and transformation that like rich people rich in experiences have. And so kind of like to accept that argument, we sort of have to look at what kind of agency immersive experiences really offer us. You know, the ancestors of today's immersive experiences offered like agency and participation too. So environmental theater in the 1970s were like, if anything, more interactive and gave you more agency really to sort of change the action than we have in immersive theater today. You know, we had Ren fairs in the past where people could go and dress up and be different people. You know, we had reenactments. You know, we had happenings where people could be part of the action, where the boundary between the artist and the audience was meant to be dissolved, right? So that was like the intention of those sort of what they would call participatory, you know, experiences or interactive experiences back then. And that was, of course, you know, in the 60s and 70s, that was all about our sort of countercultural reaction to kind of feeling that society was very like very regimented and stifling and conformist. And so, you know, let's go and have a look at, you know, the sort of agency that we have in immersive experiences today. And like really, like when you think about it, and this is like where my background as a game designer comes in, you know, the kind of agency that you have in Punch Drunk, in immersive theater, is really quite limited, right? You can like walk around, you can go into rooms and stuff, but you're not allowed to change the outcome of the action. You're not changing the plot in a lot of immersive, certainly in the most popular immersive theater that's ever been made. You know, when you go to projection art, most projection art is non-interactive, right? Some of it is, like Team Lab, but most of it is not interactive. And so you're just like looking at bigger things, right? Is that it? Is that like agency? Like maybe, I don't know. It doesn't seem like a lot of agency. You know, you're doing things, but not in a really kind of substantive way that reflects a serious choice or your personal preferences. I did this awful Squid Game immersive game box thing Like that's what I spent the last year doing, just doing every immersive thing I could. And it's just like a really bad game. It's like a bad video game. And here you're doing the Dalgona thing where you've got like a sensor on top of your head, and then you're just like tracing out the steps. And like, is that agency? I don't know. Doesn't feel like it. Just feels like I'm like wandering around the room. So people actually understood this limitation of the actual agency, the actual participation in activities that people called participatory. And so Alan Caprow, who kind of coined the term happenings, pointed out, like in 1966, he's like, to assemble people unprepared for an event and say that they're participating, if apples are thrown at them, or they're herded about, is to ask very little of the whole notion of participation. Most of the time, the response of the audience is half-hearted or even reluctant and pure cliche. Right, so like these things were like participatory, but he kind of realizes after a few years of doing like really weird and avant-garde happenings, it's like, it's not really like that participatory. Like they're just reacting, basically. Now, immersive experience, I think people are kind of less reluctant now. That there are like a lot of people who are just like immersive fiends, and they're not reluctant. They're like fully hearted. They love doing these things. But the reaction is also still pure cliche, right? It's still very predictable what's going to happen, and the choices that you have are very limited. I spoke to Felix Barrett, who founded Punch Drunk, made really the most popular immersive theater there is. And he just told me, actually, there isn't real agency. You're basically a floating camera. You don't really have much control, but you can choose where to stand to watch it. And so like he's kind of being honest there, mostly because they're going to stop making like promenade theater now. They're like, they want to do something else. And actually, what Punch Drunk want to do now is more like video games. Like they're like actually like inspired more by video games than they are by theater. And so the reason why they're inspired by video games is partly that it makes more money and they've got mortgages to pay, but it's also partly because they think that there's more agency in video games. And so when you play like a role-playing game, or when you play like an open-world video game, you kind of feel like you've got like so much agency, way more than you would have, going even to somewhere like Disneyland. You can travel anywhere, like in Zelda, you can do all these different things. In Baldur's Gate 3, you can change your character class, you can change your weapons, you can change your approach, do all these different things you want. You feel like you have like so much agency in these things to reflect who you are, to try out different things. But even video games, like kind of when you think about it, like have pretty limited agency too. I spoke to John Peterson, who's a historian of Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing games. And he said, I see computer role-playing games, especially modern ones, as having more in common with traditional storytelling, where we have a very limited scope of agency in the majority of them, even very open world games. These tools are much more like films or books than tabletop RPGs or LARPs, which I think would be like just like shocking actually for game designers to hear, that they're like more like film directors, or novelists, than they are people making, games where you have a lot of choice. But he's comparing video games to Dungeons and Dragons, to role-playing games, where the story, the experience is mediated by humans. So if you've got 4 people around the table on some fantasy adventure or some sci-fi adventure, maybe the dungeon master, has said, okay, your like objective is to go and like infiltrate this castle. Then the players can say, you know what, like I've done too many castles. Can we just go and like start a pub, right? And then you go and do that for like 5 like weeks, which is what I did with like some friends, right? You can't actually do that in Baldur's Gate. Like if you want to go and abandon, the main quest or the side quests, I mean, the game will let you do that, but then you're just sitting around like doing nothing, right? So actually, even in video games, the sort of notion of agency is sort of limited compared to the breadth of agency you can have in other experiences. And so I actually think that the unique appeal of immersive experiences and immersive games is not really about agency. It's kind of not what people are getting, and I don't think it's even necessarily what people are wanting. I think it's actually that they give you sovereignty, which is like a word we don't really use much these days. They put you in this little universe where everything is under your control, where you don't need to worry about other people, except to maybe like kill them. And so when I say like sovereignty, it is less that the game will always let you win, right? That's not what sovereignty is. Kings and queens are sovereign. It's more that like it is entirely within your hands whether you succeed or fail. Like there's no outside, there's no one saying you can't do that. You can do anything. And whatever choices you make, that's the right choice, right? Even if you choose a wrong choice, that's still kind of like, that you're allowed to do that. No one's going to really criticize you from doing that. And so if you make the right decisions in video games and learn the right skills, most video games, you will rise from being like a peasant to being a king. It is just like power fantasy, like a sort of neoliberal idea of pulling yourself up from your bootstraps, the American dream. If you failed, it's because you have picked the wrong choices. And if you've succeeded, it's because you picked the right choices. But there's always a way to succeed, right? And so I think that is kind of like what people are imagining they're getting, what people are hoping for from immersive experiences. And if you look at a lot of the stories that people tell when they go to immersive theater or immersive experiences or escape rooms, then the discussions are always like, well, did you get to see this cool actor? Did you get like a one-on-one? Did you get into the secret room? And there are always all these guides online, like about like how to go and win at like immersive theater, right? And it's really like up to you, because this is a space where you're allowed to do that, right? You're allowed to go and like use your elbows and get in front of people. And so in video games, this is kind of nice enough as a solo fantasy, right? It's a fun escape to level up your character, and in a sort of imaginary universe and use those skills. But it sort of becomes trickier when you have other people around, right? And people do want their friends around. Like people will enjoy playing video games on their own, but actually it's kind of nice to have other real humans around with you, because at least it feels more realistic. It doesn't feel as solipsistic. But like when you're with other people, you can't actually just do whatever you want, right? If you're in an escape room, if you're in immersive theater, if you are in, on a spaceship, you kind of like have to agree on what you're going to do. You have to go and talk to other people, even if there's like limited choices. You have to go and negotiate and compromise, And so where we are right now with immersive experiences, it's still like very early days, right? A lot of people who make immersive experiences are really trying to grapple with audiences' expectations when they come in. And a lot of creators tell me that people will come in kind of expecting that their experience, their theater show, their escape room, will actually be like a video game, right? Where they can kind of do anything and they can treat everyone else, the entire rest of the audience, like NPCs, right? Rather than as like humans, as like co-audience members. And so they're there to be like destroyed, or beaten, or just like shoved out of the way, literally, because you're there to go and win. And I think this is where it's actually important. This is why I find it useful to kind of broaden the definition of immersive experiences out beyond just the last 20 or 30 years. Because we do have forms of experiences that have solved this challenge of preserving agency in a social environment, in a kind of fantastic social environment. Back in the 80s and 90s, we had multi-user dungeons, and then in the 2000s, we had MMOs like Warcraft and Ultima Online, and they developed rules and conventions that basically kind of taught people, like, here's how you play together, right? Here's how you don't be an asshole, to other people. So when you go and kill a dragon, one person doesn't go in and just steal all the treasure, right? You kind of figure out these conventions of like how you divvy things up and how you decide what you're going to do. Tabletop role-playing games and live-action role-playing and Nordic live-action role-playing have gone even further because these are sort of more embodied, right? When you're playing Dungeons and Dragons or more interesting tabletop role-playing games, like you have like theoretically unlimited agency. Like you can just say something and that's what your character does, right? Which is kind of really like worrying, right? You know, there's no rules actually except what you around the table agree on. And so you can have really like harrowing and like serious and challenging subjects tackled in these things. And so that requires, you know, audiences and participants to be really explicit about like what they're willing to do. And so they've developed ideas like safety mechanics and safety cards. So when you are having these experiences of like near sort of unlimited imaginary agency, you can keep people safe. And the thing that I found talking to a lot of creators who are really focused on the kind of visual, sensory, illusionistic side of immersive experiences is that they hate the idea of like having any kind of social conventions where people talk about what they want or what they're expecting. Right. So when I went to the Star Wars hotel, this kind of like epic blockbuster immersive experience, the most expensive one ever made in terms of like, role play, you arrive there and there's like a little like 1 minute safety briefing about here's where the fire exits are, right? And then they go and say, from now on, you're completely in the world of Star Wars. Like, there's no breaking character. You go up in that shuttle, like, that's it. And so like people get in there and they see some other audience members who are like dressed up in Star Wars robes and they're actors there. And like no one like knows what to do. Like you're just like, well, how do I play with other people? Like, I don't know how to do that. And it's because there is such a emphasis on not breaking the fourth wall, on basically like immersing people in this fictional world, that it doesn't want to admit that it's actually a fiction, right? It's kind of a little bit too realist, weirdly, for like a Star Wars thing. And so what kind of killed that experience, I think, for people, is that they just didn't really know what to do. And they didn't really kind of feel safe because the creators of that didn't want to spend the time effectively teaching people how to play together. Because it breaks you out of the flow. But if you teach people how to play together and how to approach other people who are dressed up in Star Wars characters, or if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, how to say, I actually do like this argument we're having, and I want it to be amped up, or I'm feeling really sensitive, and can we sort of like amp it down? That's how you can go and tackle more challenging subjects. And the process of kind of negotiation and compromise requires people to actually figure out like what they really want, what their values are. Like, do you think that you want to be playing in an immersive experience, in a Bridgerton experience where you are playing a really horrible person? Like, you can do that, but you might like really piss off all the other audiences if they don't understand like what you're trying to get at, right? That can be fun for everyone, but only if you all agree on it. And so the stuff that I found most interesting, I love technology. I love going to like the sort of biggest, most spectacular virtual reality experiences and things like that. But the stuff that I found more interesting are things where it is bringing together people in social settings to tackle really like challenging or really weird or really wacky subjects. This was a live-action role-playing game I played in Norway recently called Seaside Prison. And when people think about LARP, usually it's like plastic swords hitting each other over the head, shouting magic missile, that sort of thing. And this is a like 3-hour experience where everyone is imagining that they are living under military occupation in a kind of alternate universe version of Norway. And it's co-created by Palestinian and Norwegian game designers. And it is like pretty like obviously meant to simulate what would it be like if you were living under military occupation. So it's not like you are in Gaza. It's like, well, it's kind of like that. And so it is like really, I mean, when I tell people about this, they're like, why would you like do that? right? Like that doesn't sound fun. And it's like, well, I don't know. Why would you go and watch Schindler's List? There's lots of like challenging things that we do that we still think are worthwhile. And then sort of the question is, well, how do you even do that? Like, how do you do that in a way where people feel safe, right? Where people don't feel kind of taken out of the fiction and don't feel like embarrassed. And the short answer is, this is like not scalable at all, is that they basically had a 2-hour workshop beforehand, right? Where they sat everyone down and said, okay, here's what we're going to play. Here's what's going to happen at the end, right? We're going to tell you the ending, right? So we're not going to try and surprise you. We're going to show you where every single guardrail is in this experience. So then you know what you can do within that. So you have a lot of agency, actually, as a character within this experience, but you know what the rules are. This is kind of like in the history of a lot of like live performance and participatory performance. This is like really like something that a lot of creators have been reluctant to do. They don't want to go and say what the rules are. They kind of want to go and surprise people and surprise the audience. And in a lot of the more interesting kind of like challenging stuff that I've done, they're telling you, no, here's exactly what's going to happen. And we trust that we can make it interesting enough that you can have an interesting time within it. And so then, if you feel safe, then you're more willing to try something that can challenge you. And so I think, yesterday, we had Deb talking about how speculative fiction can help us imagine, creating and living better futures, where we are, changing how we interact with the environment and changing how we use energy. And I think one of the hardest parts of that is thinking about how we would negotiate and cooperate under those new futures, right? What does that actually feel like in an embodied way? And being able to do that, you can do that through storytelling, you can do that through cinema, and now you can do that through video games and immersive experiences. And I think that that's where immersive experiences can help you kind of simulate and get people used to the idea of like, okay, what kind of opportunities and what kind of sacrifices do you have to make if you want to live in that better future? A lot of the spectacular immersive experiences I've seen so far don't let you do that at all because they're so kind of railroaded and they say they give you agency, but they don't really. I think that that's something that we can really build towards. So to return to my original question, I think like all of these 3 things are actually kind of true, right? I think that people really do want to be around other people, right? They do want to find, they find the time they spend together in person more meaningful. That's what they say anyway, than when you're sitting at home watching TV or on social media. I think the desire for screen-free experiences is about having new kinds of flow experiences that are more spectacular than ones that we had in the past, but also different and perhaps more relevant to what we're interested in now. But I think, in particular, agency helps people feel more immersed in a fictional, imaginary universe because it makes the environment feel more real. Right? If you're in a static game where you can't touch anything, where you can't pick things up, or if you're in a static installation, art installation, it feels less alive, it feels less real than if it's a simulation where you can do things and it responds to you. I'm not convinced that we have less agency now than we did 100 years ago or 50 years ago, but I do think that we live in a moment where people really crave agency and control over their environment. People want that almost more than anything else. And I think immersive experiences are selling that fantasy. They're saying for half an hour, for an hour, you can have that. You can have total control. And I think that fantasy is fun. That's why we have video games. That's why people like that. But we're only really scratching the surface of what is possible if we stay in our own little fantasy worlds, our own little bubbles, because we want control. I think we can access a far broader range of emotions and ideas and stories if we're immersed in a universe where everyone shares agency, everyone shares sovereignty, right? And where we can see what it's like to be with people who want different things. And to make that work, we don't need state-of-the-art technology like virtual reality and augmented reality. Those can get people through the door. Those are really fun. But actually what we need is state-of-the-art social technology. We need people learning, again, how to negotiate and how to compromise and how to deliberate face-to-face in the creation and in the exploration of a shared universe. And I think it just so happens that those things would be an excellent set of skills to have in 2025. Thank you. I think we're doing questions. Yes.
We are. Adrian, thank you so much for that amazing talk. Truly a topic I could listen to you speak about for a very long time. And I apologize I wasn't here to do your introduction. I had the extremely non-immersive experience of getting caught in a horrible traffic jam. No social connection getting fostered there.
Or bad social connection.
Honestly. There is so much in your talk that I would like to delve into, but I think this idea of onboarding an agency is where I'm really interested in starting. That Star Wars hotel example is hilarious, but I think sometimes this reticence to kind of establish rules comes from the sense that this can only be done through the negative. I know it's something that we feel at ACMI, working in the museum, this idea that the first thing you have to tell people is don't bring in food, don't bring in a drink, put your bag away, don't touch anything except for the things that we'd like you to touch.
Right.
Can feel like a kind of unwelcoming opening. How do you think that that lens on kind of onboarding and establishing parameters can be flipped to be more positive?
I mean, I think it, what we're talking about is sort of creating, conventions and creating formats where people are comfortable doing things that they want to do, but have risks, right? And so, in a museum, you can go and keep everything behind glass and make sure no one touches things. Or you can say, some things are not going to be behind glass, and we're just going to ask you not to touch them, right? And that will look better. In immersive experiences, in immersive theatre, they used to have, and they still do have a problem, actually, with audiences going to places where they're actors and acting inappropriately, or like touching actors or things like that. And they had to eventually go and say, look, we're going to step outside the fiction when you come inside, and we're going to say you're not allowed to do this thing. But then you have this question of like, okay, what if we want to have an immersive experience where people do touch each other, right? Because people, like physical touch, like that's really important, that's really powerful. But like, how do you do that? You have to go and explain to audience members, this is something that might happen in the show, and hopefully you can feel comfortable about that. But, and I promise this is going somewhere, the issue with a lot of these things is it's just actually really expensive to do. That's why like a lot of these productions just stop happening. And so the kind of level above that is, okay, what if you have like an experience where it's just all volunteers, it's all people just doing things for each other, right? And like, how are we going to have an experience where people can hug each other? Right? Actually, we kind of want to encourage that, but we want to do that in like a non-creepy way, right? And so then the only way of doing that is just like really being like very explicit, but like, well, here's how it would happen, and here's how you kind of tell people, like, I'm not into that, or I am into that, or I want more of that, or I want less of that. And it seems like there's no other way of doing it other than like talking about it. But after you've kind of done it like 5 times, then it's like normal. And so the equivalent example would be something like a theater, like a movie cinema, or a cinema where when you first go in, people, you have all these sort of apocryphal stories of people thinking, oh my God, the train's coming out of the screen, right? Or people talking during the cinema, or people sort of throwing things. And it's like, eventually people just like understand the conventions of what you're meant to do there. And we just haven't really, not only have we kind of lost a lot of these social conventions for like various reasons, but we don't even really have them in entertainment. And so like, how can we build those social conventions in immersive entertainment so that then they are giving people the skills to do that, with other people in real life. And the sort of commercial nature of a lot of these experiences, when I've talked to people like the people who make Bridge Command or escape rooms, are like, they're always like, we would love to do, workshops, and we'd love to do like an hour-long thing, but we just can't because we can't make enough money. And so the need to provide convenience and speed is massively limiting the kinds of experiences that these things can offer, which is a shame, but that's like capitalism.
I think there's something really interesting in this idea of not just agency, but sort of sovereignty and authority being the fantasy. Also something that I think museums struggle with, presenting themselves as a kind of cultural authority, particularly in Australia, on unceded First Nations land. I wonder, in terms of the relationship between visitor immersion and experience and kind of external authority, what do you think the tension is there, or how can that?
I mean, we went from like a moment where the museum curator is God, basically, and like, the label is a voice of God, to one now where at least some museum goers are like, no, I'm God, actually. And I did my own research, and I know that like all this stuff, here is just lies, actually. And so I think museums are like obviously having a bit of a problem with that, because they're just like, well, how do we go and write for like these different audiences? Some people who still want us, some people who still want to treat us like gods, and other people who think they are gods, and so then I don't know, some museums just get rid of all the labels, and it's like, it's up to you, figure it out. Here's like 5 different like labels you can choose from, and some places where it's just really like really woolly. I was talking to Seb about this. There was a new museum, I think the Hunterian in Glasgow. And they redid their entire collection, and they had some like Chinese artifacts, and they really wanted to show like how cool they were with the community, and they just asked like it's like they got some random Chinese people off the street, and they said, what do you think these pots are? And the people are like, I don't know, maybe they put wine in there. And it's like, this is like ridiculous. Like, that we have like Chinese experts, you don't have to go and get some random person off the street. But there is this idea of like, okay, no, that person by dint of their identity is like an authority. And I don't think that it's like really hard to actually go and to give people the practice or like the skills to be like, okay, like here's how we like disagree, like here's how we talk to each other. Like that's more than like a museum label, like or a museum exhibition can do. Like I wouldn't want to put that on museums, but it's more just that's kind of where we should be getting to. And even just like labels, which are like, so what do you think? It's like, I don't know, like that's not like I'm coming here to try and learn, hopefully, or maybe some people are just coming here to see cool things. I don't know.
I'm thinking of games like Dungeons and Dragons or GM-less games where authority is sort of more dispersed, or particularly for the Dungeon Master in Dungeons and Dragons, more supportive than authoritative.
Yeah, I mean, I think that all of this might seem like a little bit like what has like Dungeons and Dragons, and like role playing got to do with this stuff. Like, I should probably go and add that like everyone is like now stealing ideas. Like all the game designers I know are like stealing ideas from Dungeons and Dragons and from live action role playing, because like we want to go and challenge people more. Like we don't want to just do like a game where you like kill everyone. We want to do something that's a bit harder, but like how do we go and do that? When you talk about like when you're sitting around the table playing Dungeons and Dragons, the person running the show or like facilitating the show, actually, like you say, is always there. But if you've got like a live action game where like you've got like 500 people running around a castle, you can't have someone there all the time. So everyone just has to agree. Like, if we get into combat in one of these games, like simulated combat, like how does that work? Is it the case where it's just like, if I'm like physically bigger than you, then I will always win. Like, is that like interesting? Do people really want that? Or is it more interesting if we sort of agree that the story for everyone is better if like I lose, right? And so there's this kind of philosophy of like play to lose, basically, which is like we can make a more interesting game. There's a mechanic in some of these games where if two people get into combat, the attacker says, okay, I'm going to use this particular attack. And the recipient, the person who's being attacked, they decide whether it works or not, which is just kind of really interesting. Like, how does that's a completely different way to like Fortnite, where it's like, well, it's just whoever's good at hand-eye coordination wins. It's like, no, what if we had something else where we're trying to tell a different kind of story? And that's where you have to go and really co-create it. And I think for a lot of artists, honestly, they will talk a good game about co-creation, but they just actually have no idea like what that even means, like in practice.
I feel like that might be a conversation we should continue on stage. I'm fascinated by that. But your discussion of sort of LARPing and a lot of these kind of more game, not to bring up another keyword that you have discussed thoroughly in a previous book, but sort of gamified or game-like experiences. In addition to sort of social connection, screen-free, and agency, there's a question here asking, do you think of immersive experiences just as a form of play, particularly thinking about Huizinga's concept from Homo Ludens?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is where like people will start like, this is the danger of writing a book about immersion, because everyone's like, oh, you can just go and include anything then, can't you? No, I think play and playgrounds, are really powerful spaces of like exploration, right? And so I just read a really good book called Playgrounds by Ben Highmore, and this is basically about the history of experimental playgrounds. So when you like picture like a playground in your mind's eye, I mean, when I was growing up, it's just like a flat like patch of asphalt with like a swing and some slide and some like, bars, and that's it. And you just go on these things, and it's kind of like thrilling for like 5 minutes, and then you go away. But then there's a kind of parallel movement of experimental playgrounds during the 20th century, which was, I mean, kind of literally like a bomb site. I mean, they were like, these were like made in like World War II, and they just had like planks of wood and nails, and the kids did what kids did, and they like built shacks and they built towers and stuff. And one would probably call that immersive, right? I mean, it is like an analog version of Minecraft, right, or Roblox, right? And they had like ultimate agency there, right? It was obviously dangerous, right? Kid could go and like put a nail through their foot or something, right? But then there's this really beautiful saying by one of the proponents, and she said, better a broken arm than a broken spirit, right? Which is basically like, no, these kids, like, there's a really like a thing that would happen all the time when they opened up these playgrounds in other cities, and they would normally sort of like bring a bunch of like materials and tools and wood and whatever. And on the first day, all the kids would just rush in and just like hoard everything. And so everyone's got like, one hammer and half a plank of wood or something, and you just can't do anything with that. And then it's just like a depression. It's like an economic depression. And everyone gets mad at each other and says, why wouldn't you give me my, more stuff? Then we can make the thing that I want to make. And after like 3 days, the tragedy of the commons like ends, and they're like, okay, fine. I guess we will work together and like build something. And they build like a shack, and they're like, actually, the shack sucks. Let's go and take it apart and do a better one. And so that is where, like, I think it's like unquestionably like an immersive experience, right? It's multisensory, it's embodied, they're imagining they're building castles, right? But it's also like highly social, and they're learning. It's not meant to be didactic, but they are learning like skills of like cooperation, basically, and of compromise, and they just have to talk to each other. And we don't have that now because of everything.
OH&S. This leads into a question that I imagine you got a lot about gamification as well, which is, do you think immersion can play a role in creating empathy?
Well, I mean, it can. I just read this book called In the Land of the Unreal, which I've read a lot of books, and it's about virtual reality. and there was this like very there's this like utopian idea that virtual reality would be like the empathy machine, right? So you can go and like literally-ish see what it's like to be in the shoes of like someone else, right? And but people thought that about cinema as well. People thought TV would like provide empathy, because now you could see documentary footage of different people, and it's just like quite clearly the case that has like not actually happened like consistently, right? Because it is equally possible to use like immersive technologies to like bias people to like sort of like create partial accounts of things. And so like I think it offers new ways of creating empathy, and I think specifically like embodied experiences like really help you do that. But I wouldn't want to go and say, yeah, this is like the solution to making people like better people. I think it can do that, but it doesn't necessarily do that.
Totally. Anybody who's played a game of Dungeons and Dragons has discovered that one of their friends is a complete despot.
Yeah,
it turns out.
You just need to go and ban them. Yeah.
Have you observed any obvious demographic patterns in terms of the audiences that are drawn to these kinds of immersive experiences or personality types?
I mean, obviously this is a sort of danger where it's like a very wide range of experiences. But if I'm being like super broad, it is that there's like slightly more women. I mean, because there have been surveys done of this in the UK of like the immersive, industry as a whole. There've been like really good like polls and surveys done, and it is actually slightly more women than men. Obviously, it's a bit younger. You can speculate as to why that's the case, but it does seem like a younger experience. As it was, I guess, back in like the 70s, as well, where people are like going to environmental theatre or happenings, and it's younger people as well.
That makes sense. Following from the idea of play as key here, and I'm interested in this particularly in terms of works like Seaside Prison.
Yeah.
Do you think that these kind of immersive experiences can, do they replace or do they draw people towards political action, such as, and kind of encourage them to exercise real world agency?
I mean, we have seen, that there's basically like about 30 years of people doing this sort of like more political, like contemporary experiences versus like your classic hitting people over the head with like a plastic sword thing. And there are absolutely people who have become more political and have, I mean, in some of these like LARPs, like you go on like pretend demonstrations, and people just like know like what it's physically like to be on like a 12-hour like demonstration because they've done it. Right, so like it can do that, but of course, like some people can just treat it like escapism, and they, go back to whoever they were outside of it.
True, sort of like any other form of
Yes.
media.
Yes.
I do want to ask you one more question, but I might have to leave it till later because we are having to go to a break now. Could everyone please give Adrian a big round of applause as thanks?